Cool, so welcome to another Retropower Uncut, and I'm in relatively high spirits because this part of the workshop, which last week was looking absolute scene of devastation, despite being supposedly the lovely new bit of the workshop, is now looking how I'd hoped it to be. So we're extremely close to completing the work in here now. So the mezzanine, you can see behind me, we built to essentially become our parts stores. Rich has been working really hard, getting all this racking set up, moving all of the parts up there. So we've now got pretty much all of the component storage now up there. I'd say we've got about 3 times what the storage space we used to have. And it's all up there out of the way off the workshop floor, which is good. He's just in the process of doing the handrailing around it, which is almost done. It's this section down here to finish. With the other side of the handrail finished, that allowed us to then put all the cars over there back where they should live. Got covers on them all, so that's all super clean now. Car storage over there. The panel racks here that you might be in shot or might not are going back through to the body shop when the work in there's finished. And then really we've just got a little bit of organising tools away and things into cabinets that we haven't yet found a home for. And that will be the work in here done. So very relieved, but certainly at the moment we've now got our build bays back with space around them, nice working environment, so really happy. James has been working on Utah. I said last week that we were basically working towards Rolling Road, which is going to be next week. So we've just been ticking off jobs to do with that. So first thing he was working on was the steering column downlink. Basically because of the way the XJ40 rack, I think it is, we've got in there, has a very steep pinion angle. So it's quite a tight angle to get between that and where the column comes through. So we've got a double universal joint, which we've currently just mocked up by having 2 universal joints back to back with a little joiner shaft. But what we are going to do is machine our own section for the middle, so it basically becomes a double universal joint. And then on the sort of downlink to that joint, because with the double joint, if it's unsupported, the column will just sort of flop around because of the 2 joints. You have to actually support the column shaft itself, so we've got a rose joint, which is just making up, which basically supports that intermediate section of shaft. So that's the sort of finishing touch on getting that steering linkage completed. Then he's been doing the handbrake. So if we rewind back a few months, we probably talked about the fact that we were changing the rear brake arrangement on these. If you're familiar with the original Jag rear brake assembly, it's a bit of a hodgepodge arrangement, particularly the handbrake caliper, which is a bit of a strange design, shall we say. We've gone with a sort of integrated handbrake caliper. It's actually a S14 Nissan 200SX caliper. We did all the bracketry for that ages ago. We just needed to finish the cable arrangement, so James has been making up the brackets underneath that hold the handbrake cable outers, and then making a little rose jointed linkage that then attaches that to the original crank on the handbrake lever, which interestingly, for those who don't know about Mark II Jags, the lever's actually on the outside near the door, just sort of between the seat and the sill. And then there's a link rod, or a bar, shall we say, a tube that runs across under the seat. Goes through a little hole on the transmission tunnel, and then there's a spline on the end of that with a sort of cast crank on it. So when you pull that, it basically pivots a crank in the transmission tunnel, but the lever's actually on the outside, which is, I don't know if there was a particular thinking. I imagine somebody watching will say exactly why that was put like that, but it's quite a nice feature. Your immediate reaction is you think it'd get in the way when you get in and out, but it doesn't really, because your feet tend to be further forward. What else have we done on this? I think there was one other thing, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I think James is just about, in fact, to take the exhaust off to weld in the lambda boss. So when we're doing the mapping, we can get a lambda reading from that. We're not actually running closed loop on this. So some ECUs actually use a wideband or narrowband lambda sensor to feed a continuous air-fuel mixture ratio signal to the ECU, and can actually alter it on the fly. I mean, all OEM type internal combustion powered cars will tend to be like that these days. So it can actively tweak the mixture as you're going along, rather than just sticking to a set map. Now we're not doing that on this, but we do want we do need that reading for when we're doing the actual mapping session, so we've got a reliable, accurate fuel air mixture reading. So that's what we're doing that for, and that pretty much completes what we're going to need to do ready for rolling road, which is in just less than a week's time. So that's that. If I wander around here, try not to fall down the pit. I'll have a little look at the Chevette. So we're still waiting on the wiring loom, which I think is going to be dropped off tomorrow for the Chevette. But in lieu of that coming, there's a few jobs we've managed to tick off on it. So the fuel tank arrived. We basically drew up that tank. We'd already integrated mounts for it when we did all the metalwork, and we had a sort of plan for how that was going to be. I did a rough sketch drawing, and Concept Racing did the fabrication. Fair play to them. They turned it around in unbelievable fast time. Concept, I'll have mentioned before, are the guys that we use for all our sort of precision aluminium fabrication. So typically radiators and fuel tanks we use them for. So that now needs the straps making to strap it down. We've trial fitted it in there, fits a treat. It's essentially a rectangular tank with a little notch out each side underneath. On one side that clears the tunnel that's in for the exhaust silencer, and on the other side it just comes up to clear a pressing in the original bit of floor. And then we've got essentially a dropped pot in the middle. You might call it a swirl pot, but it's basically an anti-surge tank in the fuel tank itself. So there's a round pot extending from the bottom, which is only linked through to the main tank via a few small holes. So the fuel fills that, but can't easily slosh out of that during cornering, braking, acceleration, etc. And that's where the output to the fuel pump is, and then the return feed to the pot goes straight into the pot, so the return from the fuel rail is always continuously filling that pot as well. And it basically means that any amount of hard driving, you're very, very unlikely to ever get any fuel surge issues. And also the way the return is positioned right at the side of that pot, so it basically swirls the fuel in there, which promotes getting the aeration bubbles out of the fuel. So it's a sort of uninterrupted, unaerated fuel supply. So that's ready to be strapped in, just got to make the straps for that. Scott's also put the brake bias adjustment knob in. We're running a Tilton floor mount pedal box in this, which we did all the metalwork fabrication for when we were back at that stage. We also did the bracket on the cage, integrated into the cage welded in, so that was done at the metalwork stage. So the remaining bit was basically to cut the cable to size, attach it to the balance bar on the pedal box and bolt the control knob in, which is now done. He's also bolted in the Motec engine ECU and PDM that sit in the near side kick panel. I think probably a couple of episodes ago we showed those panels being made. They went away for anodizing, came back, they're now bolted in. So that's all there ready for when the wiring loom arrives. We've also been doing some CAD design work on a couple of components. So the rear brakes, the bracketry for them came as part of the axle. It's got an Atlas fully floating Atlas. Oh, I can't get my words out. An Atlas fully floating axle in it. And the brackets for the AP calipers on the back were integrated into that axle casing. On the front, we're using normal Vauxhall Chevette uprights. So we've now drawn up caliper brackets to mount the AP 4-pot calipers we're using, and we're using AP discs on the front, which I think are 304mm off the top of my head. Now they're sort of separate bell type discs, so we've also CAD drawn up the bells for those discs. They bolt onto the back of the hubs in a similar fashion to how the originals did. We've got alloy hubs on this, which are non-standard, but the original hubs have the wheel on the front and the disc bolts to a separate bolt pattern on the back. So that design has been retained just with an alloy hub, and the bells we've drawn up bolt onto that register on the back of the hub. Then also the rear lights. So I think we mentioned before that we've done custom front lights on this, which are Hella Xenon units, which we've made bracketry for, and then designed a bezel, which is going to be machined from aluminium. We've also designed our own rear lights for it as well, which are basically a machined aluminium plinth that will be black anodized. It's got an LED lamp unit that's then sunk down inside it, and then there'll be a machined acrylic cover that basically screws onto the top in a smoked acrylic. So it'll look very stealthy. You won't really see that the lights are there. It'll all look fairly black, apart from when you actually turn those lights on and then they shine through from behind this acrylic cover. So really, they're going to be machined, I think, next week. So really looking forward to getting those here, get those anodised. That's going to be one of the finishing touches exterior-wise. And then when the wiring loom goes in, we'll be able to put the remaining wing on the front, so it kind of brings it all back together in terms of the look. And as I mentioned last time, once that wiring's in, we've then got a domino effect of jobs that we can do. So we can cut all the carbon trim panels, get those in, do the carbon panels and the dash. Dash can come out to go for flocking. We should be also getting the machine components for the Motec keypad mount back next week. They'll go for anodising along with the light surrounds, and then that can go in. And then at that point, everything can go in the interior. We can get the seats in, harnesses in, all of the billet parts inside, and we'll be really cooking on gas then. So that's that. All right, let's have a wander through here. I feel like I'm about to lose my voice all the time, so I do apologise if I start going a bit croaky. Nice to wander through this bit with all these nice tidiness everywhere. Cars covered up, no dust, all the parts upstairs. It's a revelation. Lots of mugs still available, by the way, if you go onto our website, retropower.co.uk. There are still mugs available. They've been selling really well, but there's a few left. Right, let's go and see what's going on in here. So, Tom, and we're just going to turn this light around. I think that might be dazzling the camera. Tom's been on with Land Cruiser still. I think last time we saw him doing this quarter panel. He's now been moving on to this rear section here. So this comprises a number of sections. There's this inner box which I showed being fitted a few weeks back. The final outer skin for that is, if I can get this without knocking those bonnets over, this section, which goes right over the top. And then the boot floor we mentioned was going to be replaced as well, and that actually sandwiches in between the two. So you have this underneath section which has got a downward toggle here. Boot floor sits on top of it, and then this outer capping then goes over the top. So you've basically got a three skin thick seam at that point. So there's been a lot of in and out of trial fitting panels on this. This section's now all tickled and formed to the right size to get that to be a perfect fit. And then it's been working on the main boot floor, which by all accounts has been a bit of a pain, to be honest. I mean, the panel was a little bit, from where the pressings had been put in, it was a little bit pringled, as we'd call it. So he had to do some shrinking and stretching on that main panel to get it all to sit flat. Then there's a number of cross members underneath here. So there's this back one that it laps onto here. There's another one sitting under here, and there's another one right in that front corner. This, I think, was the one from that front corner. And we basically concluded on this one that by the time you've got the spot welds out of this, and they're absolutely massive, you probably can't see from there, but some of these spot welds are about 10 mil in diameter. It was going to be such a big job that it was actually be quite quicker to remake this cross member, even though there's nothing wrong with this one. It would be less time consuming to remake a cross member than to separate this one from the original boot floor at that point. So we made a new cross member for that bit, and then stripped out all the remnants of the original floor down the sides there. So I had to put a joggle in along the front edge here where this floor meets the original floor there, to lap those over each other at that point. And then a lot of his head scratching at the moment has been trying to work out the sequence of events to actually install this floor. It's extremely tight to get in and out because it fills this width completely here. The only way you can get it out between these ribs is by bending it up in the middle, and of course as soon as those cross members are fitted to it, you can't do that anymore. Now I imagine when these were built, the cross members were probably in there first and then the boot floor over the top, but because of the order of events and the ability to get into certain areas with a spot welder, we can't do it in that order. So we've got to try and get the floor in and get those cross members spot welded to it in some way, which is proving to be quite difficult. Now, it worked out that with the front one here, because it's not very deep, that didn't massively hinder getting it in and out. It meant you couldn't bend it anymore, but there was a little narrow window of angle where you could come in over the top of these short ribs and under these ones here and actually feed it in and back. And it will come in like that with that front cross member in, but it won't come in like that with the middle cross member in. But what I was talking to him a minute ago, and what he worked out was that you can get it into place, you can then slip it forward slightly off this lapped edge, drop the back corner down to flip the front corner up, and with it down underneath here you can actually get it up to a reasonable height. So I think his current plan is to drop it down like that, get that middle cross member underneath it, get around with the spot welder with one side up to spot weld one side of it, then drop that side down, bring the other side up and get in the other side to spot weld that side in, and then I think at that point the whole thing can drop in and he can do the finish welding down the sides and across the back here. So yeah, a fiddly operation, and often challenges like that aren't the first thing you would think would be difficult when you're faced with doing a boot floor like this. You think, well, it's a flat panel, can't be that difficult, basically clean the old one out, weld the new one in. But it's sometimes challenges come out of seemingly unexpected areas. So that's where we're at. I think he'll be about done on that this week, and then it's just this section to go in the back here, and then we are getting very close to completion of rot repair on this. There's the front edge of the bonnet to do still, and then I think we'll do a full panel build up on the car so we can just tweak and perfect any gaps and things on it, and that'll be all of the rot repair part done, and on to the more exciting bit, which is what we hoped we'd be straight into at the start, but as is the way these things go. Let's have a look at the Morris. So we'll start with the bonnet. We had previously done some reinforcement across here and designed a latching method here, because the bonnet, as you know, now flips forward rather than up from the front. But we weren't happy that it all latched, but there was a lot of flex in the bonnet still, and if you weren't particularly careful when you were shutting it, it was very easy to get it slightly out of line and the latch pins not go into their holes, or you'd get, it just didn't quite feel right basically. It felt like you had to be quite careful to put it down and then shove it in certain ways to get it to go into its latches. And I really want it so you can pretty much just shove it down and not have to worry about anything like that. So Stu's been reworking all of this rear edge here, which I think he's done a little piece about himself, so I'll hand over to Stu for a second on that.
What I'm doing here is making a new reinforcer for the rear edge of the bonnet. The reinforcer that we had before was a little bit too flexible. And the bonnet itself is pretty weak as far as structure goes. So I had to make this new reinforcer, which will incorporate the repeater lights which sit through the outer trims. And I'm just at the moment making up the catch plates, which will hold the bonnet catches themselves a bit there. So this is what I'm just doing at the moment, just trying to make this box up, which will incorporate the captive nuts to hold the catch, and then get all that welded in. I'll tap the edge over this end, bond the front edge, and then spot weld behind where the trim will fit. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, so that seems to be going quite well. Looking forward to Stu kind of getting through this and trial fitting that back on the car, and hopefully we've made a big improvement, because I think this will have really stiffened up the bonnet. I don't know if Stu mentioned, but one of the big issues really is that it's just a single skin here, which you almost never see on a car where a panel is just a single skin. It normally has an edge that's rolled round over an inner reinforcer. And just a single skin on that there is not really acceptable. To be honest, it wasn't really an acceptable method of construction originally, but that seemed to be the way quite a lot on these cars. Although everybody gets upset when I suggest that they weren't perfectly engineered originally. So what else has Stu been on this? He was doing the interior light mount. So we wanted a centrally mounted interior light sort of up in the front of the roof area of a reasonable size. So we're using just a generic Hella interior light, and Stu's made a little metal pod that bolts up into that reinforcer. I think he's rib nutted the reinforcer, and then the pod, we've done slots in it so it's adjustable in its exact position. We've also left it over length because what we want to do is, because it's going to meet up with the headlining, the top edge of it, I want to make sure that it meets perfectly with the headlining. So we're going to leave the final fettling of that piece until we've upholstered the interior, so we can then trim the edge of that pod to meet up perfectly with the headlining all the way around. So we've taken that as far as we will now until the rest of the car's built. I talked about previously, but I don't think we saw it done, was the Speedo Aperture. So these cars originally have a fairly large speedometer aperture in the middle of the dash, and we wanted to retain that piece of design. Now there's a company that we've used quite a few times. They're in the States, called Classic Instruments. They make some really amazing instruments, and they do one that I think it's something like 5.5 or 5 3/4 inch diameter, and it's got a speedo on there, it's got a tacho, it's got temperature, oil pressure, volts and fuel level, and it's a really nice classic looking design. So I wanted to use one of those. It's just something like 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, possibly bigger than the original. But we figured it would be much better much less time consuming to refabricate the dash than to actually have a completely bespoke instrument made, which they will do. You know, they've made bespoke gauges for us before, but it makes more sense just to use their off-the-shelf one. And so Stu's fabricated a little enlarged aperture that basically has been welded into the dash to make that whole pod sort of hole bigger, but still integrate with the shape that was already there. So that's looking neat. And another thing we've been on this, George has been doing the mirror mounts. So you saw previously that Stu was tasked with the job of creating single piece glass. So he's redone the frame so that the quarter light frame is much further forward, just leaves a little triangle in the front corner of the door. We're going to have custom glass made for it, which is then obviously much larger. We've done all the mechanisms for electric lowering and raising on that, so that's all in place. And then we were looking at mounting the mirror on that little corner piece that results at the front. And when Stu did the frames, he made just a little sheet metal piece to go in there to represent what will finally be in there. But the plan was always to make a machined piece to go in there. And what we've done is we've used an off-the-shelf mirror that comes with a mounting base, but removed that mounting base and then design those little corner pieces to have that mounting part actually integrated into the shape. So that will be machined as a single unit from billet. Probably be black anodized aluminium, I imagine, in the final fitment. And that not only infills that gap, mounts the window frame, mounts the frame to the door, but also integrates the shape that then mounts the wing mirror on the outside. So that's I thought was quite a cool little feature. So that's about where we're at on this. I think Stu's just going to plough through that reinforcement, tweaking on the bonnet, getting the latches perfected on that. And then actually we are extremely close to being done metalwork wise. You saw last week, of course, he had it rolled upside down to do all the underside finish welding, which is all done. Basically everything inside's done. I think we've got a few little details left to do in the boot. We want to do some anchor points in there for a spare wheel. Possibly going to mount a small active subwoofer in there. And we need to make the mounting provision for the trim panels in the boot. But with that done and the bonnet done, and there's a little bit of lead loading to do on some of the body shut lines, I think that's basically it metalwork wise. So I would say, sticking my neck out here, I reckon 3 weeks, given that Stu's away for some period next week, I'd say 3 weeks and this will be metalwork done. And I'll probably pretty much leave it there. We've been working on the Camaro, but there's a bit of sort of trauma over there with the paint booth build. The new paint booth build isn't going overly smoothly, down to the company that are doing it. So we actually have the Camaro stuck in an area that we can't get it out of until the new paint booth is finished, and thus we can knock down the old one. So we're getting quite close on that, to the point where we need to get primer on it, and at the moment we can't do that. So we'll see where we're at next week on the paint booth. I'm hoping we get a really solid week from the guys who are installing that this coming week, and we'll make progress there. But yeah, we'll leave it at that, and see you again next time. As if that's not going to be the outtake.